Well, I'm doing good. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thanks for asking. Thank you all for joining today, or this morning rather. I am pretty excited to talk about today's webinar. As you may know, or if you are not aware, this is the third webinar that I'm hosting for the year, and this month's topic is all about labeling. So, project of mine for this year as the Food Safety Girl is to host a series of free webinars each monthly over the 12 months. And the last two webinars were actually quite successful. We talked about street food, and I don't remember what January one was about, but I thought it would be a good time to touch on labeling. I think labels are so important in our everyday lives, as everything that we particularly consume does have some form of label. So if you are a small business operator, you're in retail, manufacturing, a webinar of this nature would be an excellent one for you. So if you know anybody who should be in this webinar, now is the time to share the link to invite them over. And also a recording of the webinar will be available post today via my YouTube channel. So without further ado, let's get into today's session. So the topic of today's session is Label Smart, Product Labeling and Allergen Rules. And of course, I'm Alison Richards, your food safety girl. And the primary objective of today's, or of the platform rather, is to share food safety information with persons who are interested. Now, the objectives of today's session is that at the end, I'm hoping that you will be able to understand what is legally required on your label. So all the labels that you see, what should be there, how to correctly declare your allergens, most common labeling mistakes that are made, and how to review your labels before printing if you are in the food manufacturing business. Now, just a quick introduction of myself. I am a food safety professional with over 14 years um, experience in food safety regulation, policy, and standard development. I'm also a certified trainer. I am a food safety columnist for the Jamaica Observer. Every Thursday, I have an article in the paper. I'm also the founder of the Food Safety Girl platform. And recently, I am now the chapter director for Women in Food Safety, the Caribbean chapter in particular. So before we get into today, I have a quick poll I would love for you to participate in. And we're just going to take 2 minutes to three questions. I just ask you to answer honestly, and then we'll get on with today's session. Is everyone seeing the poll?
Yes, I am.
Great.
I'm not seeing it.
I'm not sure why you're not. Um, it should be a, a prompt screen popping up. The title should be Webinar 3, and the first question is asking what best describes your food business right now. There are some options there.
Hi, Alison. Is that in the chat? I'm not seeing it.
No, it's in it's actually should be on your screen.
Oh, I think I found it, but I had to go because I'm on my phone, so I had to go into the part that says more and then select polls slash
Okay, so
quizzes.
I'm not sure if you're breaking up Zenzile, but just to share with the others, if you're joining via your cell phone, click more in the bottom panel, and then you'll see the option for a poll, and it will pop up there. All right, one more minute.
What rumors? Never mind, got me to be. No, sorry, just emergency. Yeah, I have cabbage and spaghetti here. Oh, what cabbage? Wow, that look boy.
All right, is everyone through? All right. So I'm ending poll now. Thank you for participating. And I'm also sharing the results. Let me know if you're seeing the results. Ariana, I notice your mic is open, but I'm not hearing you. I'm not sure if you're saying something. Okay. All right, so let's get into the meat of the matter. And what is a label? I think that is a pretty important question. And a label, in accordance with the general food labeling standard of Jamaica, is any tag, ticket, brand, mark, pictorial, or other descriptive matter written, printed, stenciled, marked, embossed, impressed on, accompanying, attached, or permanently fastened to a container or the goods or product itself. Now, your label is the first thing consumers see when they pick up a product. It must clearly communicate what the product is, what's inside, and how to safely use it. In simple terms, a label tells the story of the food from what it is to where it came from to how it should be handled. I like to tell persons that your label, as when I used to be an inspector, I used to tell them that your label is your way of communicating because you're not there when people are picking up your product. So your label must be able to tell your consumer every single piece of detail that they need to know so they don't have to call you to ask you because pretty much or oftentimes you would not be available to take that call. So your label should be telling a story about your product and your consumer should be able to understand what's there. Now, why is the label a big deal? Why is it important? So your labeling is not just a marketing tool. It is a legal communication. It boosts consumer trust and brand credibility. It addresses the regulatory risks, and in the event that there should be a recall, there is some possible information that regulatory authorities and your consumers can. I'm not sure if you've ever had the experience where you've had a problem with a product and you call into that number that's on the label, and the first thing they're asking is, what's the name of the product, to take a picture of the label, because the label is really what gives the information about the product, and that's how they can in turn initiate their investigation and know where is the first place to look. In the event that there's an allergen-related incident and there's any liability, that is how your label comes into play. How are you declaring your allergens, right? And of course, labeling is also a means of meeting any exporting requirements. I do know, for example, a popular one is that locally we do not require, it's not yet a requirement for you to have a nutrition facts panel. However, if you're exporting to the US, that is a mandatory requirement. So you must have a nutrition facts panel on products that you're exporting to the US and UK. Now let's look at our local labeling regulations. We have our Jamaican standard specification for labeling of goods and any specific and those include the specific requirements for prepackaged foods, and we refer to that as our JS 350/2020. There's also the Jamaican standard specification for labeling of prepackaged foods, which is the JS CRS 5/2012, and we also have the Codex labeling standard, which is referred to as the general standard for the labeling of prepackaged food. Now let's look a bit more at our JS 350/2020. This is a mandatory standard and it specifies the requirements for the information to be included on labels of goods prepackaged for sale, the method of display for such information, and where necessary, the wording and the units of measurement to be used. We have our CARICOM standard, which is the JSCRS 5, the Jamaican Standard Specification for Labeling of Prepackaged Foods, is also mandatory, and it applies to the labeling of all prepackaged foods to be offered to the consumer for for catering purposes. So the difference between the first one that I mentioned is that that is for general. So even a chair, it talks about how the chair should be labeled. So that's for general products and goods. The CARICOM standard, which is the JSCRS 5, speaks to food in particular. So once you're pre-packaging food, even if you buy a big bag of peanuts and you want to package it into smaller ones and you're adding a label to it, that is the standard that would monitor or regulate what should be on your label. Now, the Codex standard is a voluntary standard. However, most of our national standards in Jamaica are developed off of Codex standards because Codex is really just the international food standard setting body, which is made up of countries all around the world, including Jamaica. So Jamaica would have an input into these standards, and that is the basis on which our other national standards are built because Codex just has the basic requirements, and then country can add whatever other requirements they would have. However, these requirements must be justified by science. So you can't just feel like you want to put something in your standard. It must be justified, right? So the Codex standard applies to the labeling of all prepackaged food to be offered as such to the consumer or for catering purposes. And as I mentioned before, it's referenced in all other local labeling standards. Now let's look a bit more at our general labeling requirements. These requirements are applicable to all food except those sold unpackaged or in an open or uncovered packaging. So, for example, we have our fruits. When you go into the supermarket, you realize that your banana is not labeled because it would not be a requirement under law to have it labeled because it's just open, it's not sold packaged, so therefore a label is not required. If your food is weighed or measured in or counted into the package in the presence of the purchaser, it is exempted from the labeling law. So for example, if when you get into the supermarket, you have they usually have the vat of beans like red peas or the other bungo peas, and then you weigh it out. Or if you go to the market and the persons are weighing it out for you, then of course you would not need to have it labeled. It's the same principle if you're going to a supermarket and they have a juice bar. Once that juice is being processed in front of you, it's blended, it's poured into a cup, that does not need to have a label because you're there, you're seeing what's going into your product, so you would have that first-hand information. If your product is manufactured locally and intended for export only, then of course you would not need to have it labeled for our local market because it's not going to be sold on our local market, right? And also the exemption is for where there are any CARICOM regional standard for any class of food which differs or which is gift wrapped. Now let's look into the elements of a label. On the left hand of the screen, we have a picture of a label, and starting from the top center, we have the nutrient content claim. It's saying no cholesterol. Then to the right, we have the format of the nutrition facts table. In the nutrition facts table, we have the serving size, the calorific value, and the minerals, and also the manufacturing info below that nutrition facts panel. We also have the product's weight, the UPC number, the barcode, and there's a little artwork because pictures do well in describing to the customer what products they are consuming. We also have any directions or suggestions for how to use the product, a list of ingredients, and also a logo. To the right, we have the particular labels have two major categories, your information panel and your principal display panel, which is referred to as PDP. Now, your principal display panel is the biggest side of your label. So that is what tends to have your brand name, the name of the product, the weight, any nutritional claim that it wants to make, low sugar, added fat, stuff like that. So that is your principal display panel. That is a part of the label that catches the customer's eye. And then on the information panel, that tends to have the list of ingredients, your nutrition facts, your manufacturing information, and things of that sort. This is a clearer photo. I have a sample label here, and starting at the top, we have the ingredients listing, the allergen declaration, the nutrition facts, the storage instructions, the country of origin, name and address, date marking, lot ID, net quantity, the product name, and the brand name. And all of these are required to be on your label, save and accept your nutritional facts, which will be a requirement pretty soon. Now let's get into the product name. So your product name must indicate the true nature of the food. It must be specific, not generic. So we're not going to just have pineapple just in the, on the label. It's good to be very specific. So it's pineapple chunk. Suppose you want pineapples. For example, you're doing your ham at Christmas time and you need pineapple. Is it sliced pineapple? Is it chunked pineapple? So it's very good to be a bit more specific so your consumer knows what they're buying. The name should also be coined, fanciful brand name or trademark. It may be used. So if you have a brand name, feel free to put it. In this case, on this example, in this photo is Island Harvest. So that would be the brand name, right? So it may be used, however, that brand name must be accompanied by what the actual name of the product is, right? Additional words or phrases can be used as necessary. So for example, if it's dehydrated or if it's dried or concentrated or smoked, it's good. As I said, your label is what you're using to communicate with your consumer. Now, the net quantity, that is the weight of the product. So we have can either be two. So either your net weight, which is what is, in this case, your pineapple chunks would be in liquid, right? Or in sugar, in syrup. So your net weight could be what the weight of the pineapple plus your syrup. Your drained weight would be the weight that is remaining after you have removed all of that syrup. You're probably not going to drink the syrup, so you want to know what the drained weight is. And we're seeing that on the label. Now, this weight must be declared in the metric system because that's the system that we use here. However, if you're exporting to the US, you can also use the imperial system. However, both must coincide. So if you on some labels, you might see a 350 ml / whatever ounce, but you cannot see ounce alone because we don't use the imperial system here. So if the imperial system is used to declare the net content, it shall be stated in conjunction with the metric system, right? By volume for liquid foods, by weight for solid food. So if you're having a bottle of juice, it has to be the metric weight, the weight has to be, the volume has to be there, not the weight, right? Because we're doing it by volume for liquids. And for solid food, it should be by weight, right? Now, ingredients listing, it must be declared on the label except whenever we're doing single ingredients food. So if you're doing packaged banana, vacuum sealed banana, the ingredients, I guess it's obvious, it's banana. So you don't have to have an ingredients listing if you're doing or packaging single ingredient foods. It's the same thing for alcoholic beverages for which other standards exist. So if you, for example, I know the Bureau of Standard has developed a spirits standard. So if there is any labeling requirement in terms of ingredients listing, that is what you would follow and not the generic or the general labeling standard, right? And if there are any other products that have been exempted per any standard that has been developed for national use, then they would be excluded. Now, the name and the address, this is pretty important and it's often omitted from a lot of labels. And it's very important because if I buy something from somebody, for example, the man that sells shrimp on the roadside, I buy it and I might carry it back home or to country for a family member and something happens. How do I reach out to this person? Do I have to come back to town to scour down the streets to find this person, or is this information available? So the requirement is that the name and identifiable address of the principal place of business or registered office of the manufacturer, packer, distributor, importer, exporter, or vendor of the food shall be declared. So this is important because, for example, for products for local manufacturer who may have outsourced their product, their manufacturing, or a product importer, somebody overseas has made a product, but it's locally distributed by a local manufacturer. You may put that name and address on it of the local distributor, but it must be declared distributed by, right? So it can be manufactured by because they didn't make the product, however, they are distributing it. If you import bulk and then you're packaging to sell, then you would put packed by. Or if you're just simply distributing, you can say you imported. So you're importing this product, it was imported by. Because what you must have is some way to reach you must have a local office and local contact number for the product if needs be. The country of origin, it must be declared. So we must know which country the product is manufactured in. And it can look like made in, product of, packaged in, manufactured in, assembled in. And by law as well, if you are making a product or imported product that has the country of origin is usually assigned to the ingredient that has the most. So for example, you're making tomato sauce and probably the ingredient or the one ingredient that's used the most of, or the heaviest weighing or heaviest component or percentage or composition of the product is tomato. If the tomato was harvested in Jamaica, grown in Jamaica, then the product would be, the tomato sauce would be a product of Jamaica. So that is how country of origin are assigned to ingredients that come from more than one country, whichever ingredient has a larger makeup of the final product. Or date marking. Now, our date marking is required, which should include the expected shelf life. So it must be indicated with a date of minimum durability. Now, we have several date markings. We have our best before, we have our expiration dates, we have our use by dates, and these will vary based on the nature of the product and what the intended use for. So, for example, your best before, this is the manufacturer indicating that after this date, they cannot guarantee that the product is best to be consumed. All right, so that is what the best before. It's best you consume the product before this date, or else we cannot ensure that the quality is at its best. And that's usually what the best before date is. It's more of a quality indicator. Your expiration date is that after this date, do not eat this food. If you eat it, we're not liable, right? And expiration dates usually tend to come on perishable items like your milk, your dairy. They're also on pharmaceuticals, medication, and also on baby food. So we really don't want to be playing around with baby food, right? And your use by dates, same thing. We want to make sure that we're using this before the quality declines. In supermarkets, you may see on their printed things, sell by. This is usually how they track because they would have pre-packaged these things. So they want to make sure that they're practicing FIFO and that the products are removed before the consumer can get to it, right? Now, the date marking must be placed on the goods, the label or the package. And this goes for supermarkets as well. If you're operating a supermarket, that label, that sticker has to have a date marking on it. Now, lot identification. This is also called the lot or the batch number, and each container must be embossed or permanently coded or uncoded to identify the manufacturer and the lot. Now, this is something that is not readily practiced in the country and probably not as enforced as it should. But the requirement by law is that your date codes must be permanently affixed to your product. So in reality, the stickers that we see that people put on their products is really not permitted by law, right? But the weight is on how much this is enforced. So you'll notice on a bottle drink like our Sink or I Cool, that black writing, and if you rub your hand over it, you'll actually feel that it is somewhat embossed onto the bottle, because that is what really should happen. And a perfect example that I always use to communicate it is, for example, the donuts that we buy on the street side always have a sticker on it. What if the vendor doesn't sell the donuts by the end of the day? Because that particular facility does manufacture donuts daily. So the fresher the donuts would be the day you buy the donuts. If you don't sell off all of those donuts by the end of the day, what is really stopping the vendor from just putting on another sticker on the donut, right? And that is fooling us as a consumer, because the only way you will know is after having purchased and tasted and you've spent your money already that this donut is stale. So that's the reason behind it being permanently affixed so that it cannot be removed. Now, your labels must be applied in such a manner that they cannot be separated from the container. If they are separated, I don't know if how many of you have tried to remove a label from a soda bottle. You realize it almost always rips, and that is not by accident. It is deliberate. Once you're removing it, it means that there's some indication that it was removed or tampered with, right? The mandatory statements must be clear, prominent, legible, and of course, indelible. by the consumer under normal conditions of purchase and use. The information on the label must be letters and numbers not less than 1.5 millimeters in height based on lowercase 0. So the standard is that prescriptive, and I'm not sure how many persons actually knew that it actually included measurements as to how a label should look. Now, if the container is covered by a wrapper, the wrapper must carry all the necessary information, or the label on the container must be readily legible through the wrapper. The name and the net content of the food must appear on the main panel of the label, and the language, of course, must be in English. You know, English is our first language, so of course, it would be prudent for it to be in English. And all the numbers, the net content, and the drain weight must be in Arabic numerals. So you can't come with the Roman numerals and think you're being stylish and it's aesthetic friendly. It has to be in a number that everybody knows how to read. Now, ingredient declaration, I want to go back a bit more. It must be declared on your label, right? And anybody remember what exception if there is to putting your ingredient listing on a label? I mentioned it earlier. Anybody can recall?
If
Pardon, go ahead. Not hearing you clearly.
Prepared right. Can you hear me now?
Yes, hearing you now. Go again.
I was saying if it's a single ingredient item or if it's being prepared directly in front of you or weighed
Awesome.
out directly in front of you.
Great. So that is an exemption as to why you don't need when you don't need an ingredient listing. Now your list must be headed or preceded by ingredients, contents prepared from, and this list must be in descending order by weight at the time of manufacturing of the food. Now the sample label that we've been looking at is pineapple chunks. So obviously pineapple would be our largest ingredient weight, right? So pineapple comes first, then your water, your sugar, and then in this case, the food additive citric acid was used as an acidity regulator, right? It must also include your acidity, your additives, your preservatives, and any allergens used, right? Now, your nutrition panel is a standardized table showing the nutritional content of a food product and helps consumers make informed dietary choices. It's not yet mandatory on food labels in Jamaica, as I mentioned before, but it is coming. So I always advise my clients that, get prepared. It's better to have it already on than, you have to discard of all of those other labels that you have. But it's good to just get prepared, right? It must also reflect the content per 100 gram or ml or per serving size, because this is how people will track their caloric intake. And of course, as a consumer, I tend to stay away from products that I'm not able to tell, get any information about their nutrition value. So that is also an added advantage. So even though it's not a requirement, we are seeing where consumer behavior is steering towards being a bit more health conscious, so they want to know what is inside the food that they're eating. Now, the allergens that we're looking at, we have 8 major groups of allergens. Those are the crustacean, shrimp, crab, lobster. We have sulfites, milk and dairy products, cereals containing gluten, which would include our wheat or rye, barley, and oats. We have soybeans, peanuts, tree nuts like our almonds, walnuts, and cashews, sesame seeds, fish, and eggs. Now, allergen declarations. These must be declared even in small amounts, even if they're being used as a processing aid. So once they're an ingredient or being used as a processing aid, they must be declared. They must clearly identify the allergen in the ingredient list or in a contained statement. Now, currently, our law in Jamaica does not require you to have an allergen statement. It does permit you or require you to have a precautionary statement, but it must be declared in your ingredients. So if you're not going to do a statement, it must be in your ingredients. So you need to have it listed in your ingredient. All right. Now, some examples can look like contains milk, wheat, and soy. And you want to avoid vague terms like flour or vegetable oil. What kind of flour? What kind of vegetable oil? So you need to be specific, right? Now, some common labeling mistakes. Hidden allergens. Allergens not clearly declared in the ingredient list or the contains statement. Some common hiding spots for allergens are in processing aids. So you might use soy lecithin or casein, right? For example, the other day, someone shared a video with me via social media of a nice little packaging. I think it was a coconut, like a ice cream bar, but it was being advertised as coconut, milk free. However, on the back where you had the panel, they had that it contained milk. So, just the fact that it had a coconut label, anyone who is lactose intolerant or, allergic would have made the mistake of consuming that, and then that could have been an issue. So that is a common labeling mistakes that a lot of persons make. Now, another common hiding spot is flavorings or spice blends that contain undeclared milk, soy, or wheat. And there are compound ingredients without a full breakdown. So you might put breadcrumbs in your ingredients listing, but breadcrumbs contains wheat or gluten, right? So you need to make sure that you clearly identify. Another, outside of common labeling mistakes, the use of compound ingredients in your products must be clearly identified. So for example, you're making chocolate chip cookies. You're using the chocolate chips. However, those chocolate chips do contain other ingredients. So when you're listing them in your ingredient listing, you have to put, if you put chocolate chip in brackets, you must put what the ingredients that make up that chocolate chip is, because that is how persons are going to be able to tell, is it milk chocolate, is it dark chocolate, and of course they're able to move from an informed place, right? Now, the best practice to address hidden allergens is to always identify allergens by name, even in compound or minor ingredients. An example, flavoring, if you're using a flavoring that may contain milk, you need to adequately declare it, right? In brackets, you put contains. Another common labeling mistake is duplicating ingredients. So you're listing the same ingredient multiple times under different names or in compound ingredients. That is a common mistake. For an example of this is that sugar is listed separately as sugar, glucose, fructose syrup, right? And this can mislead consumers about the total sugar content. The best practice is to declare components of compound ingredients clearly once to avoid redundancy, right? Another common labeling mistake is non-specific terms. So you use vague names that obscure the actual ingredient. So for example, you're listing vegetable oil, but what type of vegetable oil? Is it soy? Is it palm? You're also using flavoring, but what type of flavoring or seasoning? Does it contain MSG? Are there allergens in there? You're also listing spices or herbs without clarity, and the standard actually requires that once your spices and herbs make up for more than 3% of your total weight of your product, you must declare. So you cannot just put spices or herbs, right? You have to, once it's a particular, so if you're making herb seasoning, it cannot just be spices and herbs in the ingredients. You have to break down what type of spices, what type of herbs. And I remember someone was sharing with me the other morning about being allergic to, oh my God, I can't remember what it was, but it's a particular, I think it's rosemary. I don't remember, but it's a herb. And, they talked about making cheese and they just use Italian seasoning. And it's after eating it, they realized that they had this, adverse reaction. And, it's after going back, they realized that that's a persons can be allergic to particular spices and herbs, so it's just not enough to just put spices and herbs. You have to be very distinctive in what those are. I see a hand up, Zenzile.
Hi, can I just go back to the previous slide where you're talking about the duplicating the ingredients? So for this
Yeah.
one, you used the example of the sugar, but
Mm-hmm.
aren't the okay, so sugar would count as one ingredient, right? But other things like fructose syrup or sucralose or whatever, wouldn't those things count as like individual additives? So don't you have to put them even though they serve a similar purpose of sweetening?
Yeah, so that's what the point I'm bringing across. So you would not just put sugar. What type of sugar are you using? You have to be very specific. And also
Oh,
remembering that persons may be looking, so persons might not want to consume fructose syrup. So you can't just list sugar and then you list everything else. You have to be prescriptive because sugar can be anything. And if you're tying it back to your nutrition facts panel as well, we also look at total sugars. What type of total sugars? So that is the principle behind this. When you're listing them, they should not be redundant.
okay, okay, sorry. I think I
Yeah,
misinterpreted. Thank you.
no problem. All right, so back to our non-specific terms. So the best practice is, of course, to use clear, specific names that help consumers make safe and informed choices. You also want to be very specific. So, for example, are you using soybean oil, or is it natural vanilla flavoring, or is it paprika? I'm seeing a question here. If list proprietary blend, I should list the herbs also. I've seen labels without the list. How do we protect our blend? So I think that would come back down to, remember, you're not listing the amount of the herbs and spices that you're using. You're listing the what your blend contains, because, and this is why it's important. So there you have to be able to strike a balance, because yes, there is the issue of your proprietorship. However, the consumer has to know what is inside that product. And as I mentioned before, I don't know if that person is in today's webinar that was sharing with me about that particular herb that they were allergic to. It's not a herb that a lot of persons are allergic to, but it does happen. So, how is it that the assumption cannot be like, oh, nobody is allergic to basil, and I'm going to use it I'm not going to declare it. And I mean, as an inspector, that is something that we usually get a lot of persons don't want to share what their blend is, but there has to be the responsibility and the accountability that you're able to declare. So as I said before, the standard speaks to the amount. I believe it's at least 3%. So once your herbs and spices exceed a certain amount, I don't want you to quote me wrong, but I don't remember the exact percentage, but there is a limit. So if you're making a product and your total amount of herbs and spices exceeds a particular, oh, thank you, Paula, 2%. Once it exceeds 2%, then you must a line item declare what it is. Save and accept if there's an allergen, you must declare it. I hope does that answer your question, Dr. Sherry Carrera? You're welcome. So just to wrap up or just to reinforce, at least your herbs and spices may constitute at least 2% or more of your total amount of ingredients. You have to list them individually. If not, save and accept if this blend contains anything that may cause intolerances or allergic reactions. And that's why it's very important to keep abreast of food safety news, because that is really how we know every day there's something new coming out in terms of what persons are allergic to. Even just the other day I read something about nanoplastics actually feeding or helping foodborne bacteria or foodborne pathogens rather to become more resistant to microbes. So there's something always happening. There's always an emerging issue. So it is very important to stay abreast of news that's happening. Now, another or final common labeling mistake is the pre-packaged dry commodities. So a few years ago, the government came out with the repackaging of sugar. So we used to have an issue where persons would just buy bulk sugar, package, and then we get dirty sugar. The sugar is very impure, and the government, came out, made a new requirement that you have to pre-package your sugar in a formal entity, manufacturing entity, or a packaging house that is regulated by the government to do this with sugar. I have not heard anything else about dry commodities, and I'm looking forward to it because I think we should follow. So I know flour is no, you hardly ever find flour without it being in a pre-packaged bag. So it's not porno, but I mean, it still happens. But our major brands are now doing pre-packaged smaller packs. Cornmeal, the same thing, but we're still seeing Europe, but there's no legislation, the only sugar, all right? And rice still continues to get bulk rice, and that is packed out. Now, in the supermarket, these products are not always labeled. So, of course, it's missing important information such as the weight of the product, any treatment if applied, the expiration date, and the date package, because these bigger 50-pound, 100-pound bags usually come with some form of information like that. So the supermarkets now will put them out and they're not labeled. Yes, the law does permit you to have a label affixed closely to the product. I don't know if you mentioned earlier when I gave the definition of what a label is. It actually did mention or make reference to a company attached to the product. So you have to have that label. However, we just see the prices in the supermarket, right? They usually just see the name of the product and the prices. There's not much other information that's there. So the best practice now is that supermarkets should add their sticker label, and on this label, of course, the name of the supermarket, the name of the product, the weight of the product, anything that you need to know in terms of labeling, right? And you'll see this on some of your baked goods in the supermarket. That is actually a requirement. They have to put the ingredient listing, what makes up the product, any allergen statement, stuff like that. If you've been to PriceSmart before, you'll notice in the bakery section, there's a huge sign there talking about, allergens being in the product, and that is an adequate compliance move because they're making consumers know it's big and bright there. So unless you probably can't read, then that is where that risk would be. But if you can read the sign, you probably wouldn't be able to read the label, right? So that is how you have to make sure. I'm also seeing places like Burger King where you pull up to the drive-through, they have an allergen statement to say that just, this food is processed in an environment where they're handling allergens, and you're, just so you are aware of what's happening there. All right. Now, some other labeling mistakes: ingredients not listed in descending order, using brand names instead of ingredient names, no sub-ingredient breakdown, the incorrect date format. In Jamaica, we use the day, month, year. In the US, it will be the month, day, year. So how is it that we are making sure that our Jamaican consumers know what these dates are, right? The inconsistent net weight units. So we're seeing ounces instead of milliliters. We're seeing ounces instead of our weight, or fluid ounces instead of milliliters, and our ounces instead of our milligrams, right? We are seeing claims like natural without any substantial evidence. And that is a common thing now. And I want to say it's borderline food fraud. Persons just get up and be like, oh, this product is natural and everything. It will make you feel better and cure you from AIDS. That is actually illegal. You're not supposed to make any health claims on your food labels without correct scientific evidence to support it. And the public health, the Ministry of Health and Wellness actually has a section, the Food and Drugs Act, which deals with that matter. And also a very common one you'd see, copying labels from the internet, right? You need to do a label, you have a small business, and you just download something from the internet. You download a nutrition facts panel. Like the other day, I shared it on my social media. There was a bottle of water that had a nutritional facts that said it had 140 calories, so persons are just downloading, copying because it's so easy to do, but there is the risk of you losing a sale, because if I take up water and it have that amount of calories, then chances are I'm not going to want to drink it. So it's very important to make sure that your message to your consumer is accurate, that the labels do not leave your consumers confused as to what it is that they're consuming, and that, of course, going back to the implications of having bad labels is that it boosts your brand, it boosts your consumer confidence, because if I know that what I'm taking up and eating, whatever the label says is actually what I'm consuming, then of course I will continue buying this product. And of course, in turn, that provides better business continuity. So we're at the end of today's webinar, and I'd just like to share with you some resources that I have available. The next webinar is scheduled for Thursday, April 9, and we're going to be focusing on additives and preservatives. So the title of that webinar is The Truth About Additives and Preservatives. And we're going to be looking into cured meat, what additives are in our cured meats, what is the importance of following the standards as it relates to that. So our juices, anything that we eat that has an extended shelf life that is considered non-perishable has an additive or a preservative. So that promises to be a very interesting webinar. And also I'm inviting you to check out my column in today's Jamaica Observer on food safety. And that's it for me. Does anyone have any questions?
Yes, I do. Will we be getting this recording?
Yes, so at the end of today, it should be on my YouTube channel. And for all the registered participants, you will get an email with a link to this recording and also be sharing other resources as well in that email. So you can look out for that email by the end of the day.
Awesome, thank you.
You're welcome. I'm seeing two hands. I think Dr. Carrara.
Greetings. Thank you so much. And thank you for creating this community space, which is very important. I appreciated the awareness of the tampering of the best before, because that never dawned on me at all. So
Yeah.
that's definitely incorporated into my product. And the question is around contact information, because I know you mentioned the address. Can we know in social media, email world, can we use that in place of an address?
There are some variations, but I know that a contact info, there should be at least a number and an email address attached to it, and the address of the entity, and an address, a physical address. Because one of the requirements is that you must have, if you're being visited by the local regulator, you must have a physical address. So that there has to be an address for them to find you one, and there must be either a telephone number or an email address.
And
But
if
there
a
has to be
person's
some way
operating
of
from,
communicating. Pardon?
my concern would be operating from home and not wanting to put said address.
And that is a very valid concern. I would say I'm gonna get back to you because I do know that there are variations of the type of information that you can provide, but I do know that you must have a traceable address on the product.
Thank you.
Yes.
Um,
Go ahead. Wait, before, who is that? Monique Ellis? I know Monique has
Yes.
a name up. Yes, Monique.
Morning, everyone, and thanks, Alyssa, for
Yes.
this information. My question is about the nutrition facts.
Yes.
You have mentioned and you kept repeating it that the nutrition facts is it will soon become a requirement. I just
Mm-hmm.
wanted to know if there's a timeline or if you're aware of how soon we should expect that this requirement will come into force, and also if there will be a stipulated format. Because as you can imagine that some companies export to different markets and each market have different regulations and different formats. So just want to, have an early idea of what to expect where that is concerned.
So no, I don't know when an exact date, but I do know that the standard is currently being reviewed. So and I know it has been, the review process has started for a while now. So I would want to think that we're closer to the end than closer to the initial part. But of course, this screen that I have here, I'm on social media. So if you are interested in keeping up with food safety updates, because those are the type of things I post, anything that's happening and in your announcements, I will be sure to share that via my social media accounts when that happens.
Okay, and you're not sure yet if they're
No, I
gonna
don't. There
stipulate what
has no. I'm
format.
not aware of there being an unannounced date. I just know the document is closer. It's inching by in terms of all stakeholders coming on board and agreeing on certain aspects of the standard. But I do know that the new standard will have the requirement for a nutritional facts panel, based on my understanding.
Okay, thanks.
You're welcome. I believe Damien is up next.
Hi, morning everyone. Regarding the
Morning.
address for the physical address for
Mm-hmm.
the local manufacturers or entities,
Yeah.
when you're doing the check, can you check if a PO box address is
Mm-hmm.
acceptable or it must be the actual physical location?
Okay. I will address those questions in the email I'm sending out to the registrants after, so you can look out for that as well, all right?
Yeah, thank you.
All right, you're welcome. Peter Tom Simpson.
Hi, morning everyone. I think everybody has this address thing um as a question. My question was, seeing that you live in a general area and or an apartment,
Mm-hmm.
would you give the actual, can I say Kingsway apartment, do I have to put my actual apartment number? Or if I live in a housing scheme, can I just say, for instance, 2 North East Ascot, do I have to put 335 Northeast Ascot? That's what I was just asking. Can I put a general address, and then when the inspectors want, they can call and find it, or do I have to put the actual lot number?
That's a very good question. As a former inspector, I think that would be a very good approach. So as to not give any details. From my experience as well, we would, for example, I was piloting a program called the Social Media Surveillance Program, where we're literally, monitoring social media, trying to, to see persons who are not registered and reach out to them. And it's usually in that application process that you tend to reveal the nature, the exact location, because of course that information is only belonging to the regulatory entity and not to the public.
Yeah, because some
Yeah, so
persons
that's
are
a
very
very good
scrupulous,
idea.
and once you put the lot number, persons are looking those home businesses
Mm-hmm.
now to target for cash and equipment and stuff like that. So I was just asking.
Yes, I think that is a very valid or a very good suggestion. I think I saw another hand up. I'm not sure if it went down because your concern was addressed. All right, any other questions?
I have a question about um supermarkets or stores that accept foods that are not labeled properly. Is there any repercussions that they face, or is that just something that's kind of left out in the air to dangle?
So there should be domestic surveillance activities that are carried out by the regulatory agencies, in particular the National Compliance and Regulatory Authority, which is a formal regulatory arm of the Bureau of Standards. So there is a department that actually one of their mandates is to conduct surveillance on the marketplace. And also as food inspectors, we do, or they would inspect supermarkets as well, and a part of that inspection process would be to look. You're looking out to see what products are on the market space, and of course, if they're in violation of any of our labeling laws, then they would be, or the expectation is that they're withdrawn from sale, and they are either given the opportunity to rehabilitate them. So if there's anything missing that can be fixed, the manufacturer is given the opportunity to rehabilitate them, or they're just withdrawn and detained. That's a very good question. Chancelin's hand is up.
Good afternoon. It's not so much of a question, but a comment. It's a
Mm-hmm.
very informative session. I've learned a lot, and thank you for giving us the eye openers as consumers and
Mm-hmm.
continue to do. That's it.
Thank you, Chancellor. Appreciate it. Just the answer to go back on one of the questions asked. The actual address is actually required, and the street name and the number, along with the district and the country, is required. So back to what Peter says, that you probably don't have to put your apartment number, but your street name is required, and the number. So if it's 10 neuro crescent, that would be required. Dr.
I
Carrera, are you still on?
Yeah, I'm hearing you. Trust me, I'm hearing you. I'm curious now
Good.
about the PO box. That's definitely something I'll have to explore considering.
All right. So I'll check that one out and I'll respond to the email according, or share it in my post webinar email. There was someone else. I only have a minute to go.
Oh, I wanted to clarify when we're talking about the allergens and the allergen
Mm-hmm.
declaration, even if you have it listed in the ingredients, for example, if
Mm-hmm.
there's milk in the product and you have it listed in the ingredients or milk protein, you still
Mm-hmm.
do have an allergen declaration after that, right? Or is that not?
So that is not a requirement by our local law. I am hoping that with the revision of this standard that it will soon become. So you're not required to have a declaration statement per se. However, it is something that we've become accustomed to because most of our imports do have it. So, and persons have practiced it regardless of whether it's a requirement or not. But for now, it just needs to be listed in your ingredient listing. But I would not advise anyone to not put a statement because we're moving towards a lot of probably 80% of the recalls issued last year globally were because of undeclared allergens. So in my opinion, as a person who is making food and that is my livelihood, I would want to make sure that is clearly communicated to my consumer.
So just
Okay.
again, just I'm so sorry. I feel like I should keep going back. But so if, for example, a product has sodium caseinate in it,
Mm-hmm.
can they just leave sodium caseinate, or you're saying that I definitely have to put, hey, milk protein here
So
according to
that's the
our standard?
thing. That is the thing. We have to the declaration is required only in your ingredients listing. It's a requirement. There is no declaration statement that is required. Just in the sample that I showed where you had a allergen statement that is not a requirement by law. However, it is recommended it's a best practice. And when I say by law,
Okay.
I mean Jamaica law.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. Triana, your hand is up.
Okay, yes. Hi,
Yes.
everyone. Yes, thank you so much for this webinar. It was very informative. I just wanted to respond to the question that was asked regarding PO box. From what I recall, it's not that a PO box is not allowed. It can be on your label. However, that alone will not work. You would actually need a physical address for the establishment because it must be an address that it's traceable. They can find it easily, and PO boxes don't allow for that. So you could have both, or just the traceable one, but not a PO box alone.
All right, thank you, Triana. That's very important information. So just to reinforce that the PO box should not be used as an alternative for the address. It can be used in conjunction with, but no PO box only. All right. So we're gonna go now, and thank you guys so much for joining. I think this was a very good webinar in terms of the information shared, the questions asked, and of course, feel free to reach out to me via any of my social media accounts on WhatsApp. And before I go, I'd also like to mention for persons who didn't join initially, the Women in Food Safety Initiative. It is a US-based organization, nonprofit, which fosters an environment and a community for women in food safety. So if you are interested in being a part of that group, that is also available on my social media accounts. If you go into my Instagram, you click on the link in my bio, there is a link that takes you to that one, the WhatsApp group, and two, to become registered with the organization. It's free of cost, there's no charge. The idea is to just build a community for women who are in the food industry and to really just share, network, provide support in whichever way we can. And our first meeting, or our first meeting ever, is scheduled for next Thursday, the 19th at 7 p.m. All of that information is also available on my social media accounts. So if you're interested, feel free to attend. All right, so thank you for joining in today. Any more questions? All right, so see you next month. Oh, before I go, Monique has addressed Zenzila's question. For sodium caseinate, you can also state milk in parentheses after that ingredient. So sodium caseinate, and you put milk in brackets, because that would be in itself you declaring the allergen. Good answer, Monique. Thank you. Okay, take care, everyone.